Use factoring to find the zeros of f of x equals x to the fifth minus 2x to the fourth minus 3x cubed. Okay, so in this polynomial, the leading term, or the term at the highest exponent, is x to the fifth. Okay, so remember, this 5 tells us that there are going to be 5 zeros. Okay. So how are we going to find the zeros? Well, in this case, factoring will probably be the best way. Okay, now there are other methods, but you should always try to factor first. Well, let's take a look, right? Well, how do we factor? Okay, we notice that they all have at least an x cubed in common, right? So that will be the term that we factor out. So we get x cubed. Now, once we factor it out, what are we left with? We're left with x squared minus 2x minus 3. Okay? So, of course, if we went back and distributed this, right, we would end up with the original polynomial. Okay? All right. So now let's take a look, right? What about the x squared minus 2x minus 3? This is a quadratic equation, okay, which tells us that, yeah, we should be able to factor this. So using your methods that you've learned to factor, okay, we'll do the x minus 3 and the x plus 1. Now remember, these are called factors, okay? This is not necessarily the answer, okay? The question asks us to find the actual zeros, okay? So once we have the factors, what's the next step? Remember, we set each factor equal to 0. So we get x cubed equals 0. We get x minus 3 equals 0. And x plus 1 equals 0. Now, of course, if x cubed is equal to 0, then it just turns out that x equals 0. Okay? We get x equals 3, and we get x equals negative 1. Okay? So these, right, these three are our zeros. Okay? So make sure you know the difference between a zero and a factor. Okay? Well, let's take a look at this a little bit more carefully, right? We know that this is a fifth degree polynomial, so okay, there should be 5 zeros, right? Well, we only have 3 here, so what really happened? Okay. Now this exponent, this x cubed, tells us, right, there's actually 3 x's, right? X cubed is really, right, x cubed is really what? X times x times x, right? So essentially, you can look at it this way. There's 3 of these, right? There's 3 of these x equals 0 zeros, okay? Now, because of that, right, we don't have to really list all 3 of them. Okay, we can just say that x equals 0, okay? We'll learn about this a little bit later. Okay? But for the most part, right, at this point, we can say that the zeros are 0, 3, and negative 1. What does that mean? It means that if you actually calculate f of 0, right, if you plug in 0 back into this polynomial, we're going to get 0. If you plug in 3 into the polynomial, right, and calculate that, we should equal 0. And if you plug in negative 1, plug in negative 1 here, negative 1 here, negative 1 here, work everything out, we should get 0. That's why they're called zeros.